Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hey there, welcome to episode 3. In this episode, I have a chat with Sinead McElhinney from the PR team at Kobo. We discuss some interesting reading data that Kobo recently released, as well as a bit about her role as a PR coordinator for one of the 4 major ebook retailers in the global market. I conducted this interview when traveling over the Christmas break, and because my mother's house doesn't have Wi-Fi, I headed down to the nearest Tim Hortons so that I could jump on the free Wi-Fi and connect with Sinead via video chat. For my non-Canadian listeners, Tim Hortons is a national coffee chain and a donut shop, something like Dunkin' Donuts. Now, because I was in a relatively noisy environment with people and a radio in the background, my own audio is a little less than desirable, so please forgive that. But speaking about audio, if you're an author and you're interested in having a professional audiobook produced at among the most valued and lowest prices in the industry, look no further than Findaway Voices. Created to empower independent authors and small publishers with the ability to produce and distribute high-quality audiobooks, Findaway Voices works with professional narrators from around the world and a guided process for the creation of an audiobook where you control not only the end retail price, but also the distribution to multiple global channels. Yes, Findaway Voices is a sponsor of this podcast, but I wouldn't have them as a sponsor if I didn't find great value from their service myself. To learn more about Findaway Voices, go to starkreflections.ca/findaway. But soft. Did you hear that? It's a knock on my digital door. Ooh, let's see who that is.
Hi, this is Kevin Tumlinson from the Wordslinger podcast. You're listening to Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing. Mark is talking to some of the smartest folks in publishing and also me. So listen close, take notes, and you can hear more from me and my own brilliant guests at wordslingerpodcast.com.
I couldn't resist playing this fun bumper from Kevin Tumlinson, a fellow writer and industry personality. Some folks know Kevin as a representative from Draft to Digital, but my favorite role of his, apart from his amazing karaoke that is as the host of the Wordslinger podcast. Kevin has a great interview style that's worth a listen. But in any case, that was just a little tease that you'll be hearing my chat with him on this podcast in a forthcoming episode. So if you're not subscribed, go ahead and make sure that you don't miss a single episode. Okay, without further ado, here's my interview with Sinead McElhinney from Kobo. Sinead, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Well, please tell our listeners a little bit about you, what you do, your role at Kobo, and how you got into PR.
For sure. So I am a PR specialist on the communications team here at Kobo. Backstory, so I originally got into PR through an agency, how most young junior PR people do. So I did that for a while, and I had a lot of tech clients as well as lifestyle clients, and I realized I really liked how they intersected. So I wanted to work for a company that dealt with lifestyle and tech, and I think Kobo is a great example of that. My job here deals with social media, it deals with some marketing, it deals with working with multiple PR agencies across the globe, and just making sure that anything the customer sees or experiences is on brand and supports book lovers.
So what is your favorite aspect of social media since you've been at Kobo?
Social media it's kind of a double-edged sword. I love it in the fact that it really does help any tech-related company. So I can tell customers if we are ever having a great promo, and I can also interact customers with a one-on-one level. If they tell me they love this book or they have questions about a certain part of our device, I can answer it instantaneously. On the other hand, it's something that's a little bit out of our control. So Facebook, for example, changes algorithms to make sure that consumers aren't getting annoying ads, or they're making the most of every single post they see. So a lot of my job is dealing with how can we make sure that consumers are seeing exactly what they want to see, and how can we keep it relevant now with attention spans changing and everyone expecting to see the most innovative, the most exciting videos or ads or emojis, making sure that everything is interesting on some level. That's a struggle, but it's also the greatest part of social media, I think, making sure that you're using GIFs, making sure that you're linking to third-party content. All that really does encompass part of my role. And I think people who look at social media from a consumer standpoint is very different than when you do it for a job. I love to use Instagram on a personal level, but then when I'm doing it for Kobo, I can't post things that are cute or, cute photos of coffee just because I like it. I have to keep in mind that I am serving a very large demographic.
Yeah, and not all book lovers drink coffee while they're reading. It could be tea. It could be some other beverage, right?
Exactly. So you're always trying to keep an open mind of what you personally like may not be what serves most of our audience or different demographics that we do try and incorporate. Especially now with having audiobooks as part of our service, we're trying to keep in mind, well, we have to post things that appeal to millennials as well as a little bit of an older demographic.
That's cool. And I'm going to want to get to audiobooks first, but I was very fascinated. So Kobo has always been a leader when it comes to sharing statistics and reading data and things like that. And in December of 2017, the PR team at Kobo shared a fascinating list, not only about the top selling, but also the top read, i.e. books that were actually finished, or the unputdownable books that Canadian readers were into. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So every year Kobo really dissects the data to understand what are our consumers doing with the books that they buy. And the intention, of course, is to buy a book. But if you're anything like me, you buy more than sometimes you finish. So we published a list of our top 10 best-selling titles, and some of them you won't be super surprised by. So The Woman in Cabin 10, The Handmaid's Tale, The Silent Wife. But my job was to really dissect that data. So, for example, the top 10 best-selling, if we take the second one, The Handmaid's Tale. So this was published by CanLit, Margaret Atwood, and the original story was published in 1985. So now, taking into account it's made a 2017 Canada's top 10 best-selling titles. Well, why? So that's what fascinates me. So is it because of the recent TV series? Is it because of pop culture? Like, what made this book all of a sudden have a resurgence? So that was one that kind of took me by surprise. Our most read list is different than our best sold. So even though something may be a bestseller, it may not be read to completion. So our most read list looks at books that are exactly that, most read to ideally the end of the book or very, very close to it. So the most read list, the top three, are Secrets in Death, The Right Time, and The Good Daughter. So this means books that actually got finished. So you didn't get halfway through and decided that, maybe you'll take a break from it. These are books that actually were read to completion. And then the other list that we published had the longest reading session. So a lot of tech consumers, such as Netflix, people call it binge worthy. I myself fall in habit of it if I'm having a sick day or just a lazy day. Well, I also binge read, which people are with me doing it as well. So, for example, The Girl with No Name, The Clay Girl, and The Good Daughter were all had high reading sessions. So that means people were reading for longer sessions. Maybe it was 20 minutes, maybe it was 30 minutes, as opposed to a shorter reading time.
So this is, I find that the most fascinating, particularly from a writer's perspective, is looking at this is a scene, this is a section of the book that just they could not stop reading. Were there particular sections in books, or was it just as a whole, these were the books that people had the longest sessions of, no matter where in the book they were?
So yeah, this was dissected by longest session. So we could get more granular and look, well, was it a certain chapter that was read the longest? But we took it on average. So say on average we saw the reading sessions were 29 minutes. So we'd look at our best list of 250 and we'd see which books were read the longest in succession. So for example, The Girl with No Name, that book session was the absolute longest out of all the books that we looked at.
Okay. And it sounded to me, when I was looking at the titles, it sounded like the majority of the titles were either suspense or thrillers or of that genre. Is that what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. And it did have an anti-heroine theme. That's made popular by books such as Gone Girl, The Girl on the Train. So lots of girl in the title. The first two being The Girl with No Name, and the second one being The Clay Girl, which was actually a Kobo Emerging Writer Prize finalist. So it's interesting that the first three books deal with females. So the first two say girl, and the third one is the good daughter.
That's fascinating. It makes me want to write a thriller called The Girl Who Couldn't Put Down the Book.
There you go.
I think that could possibly be a contender for next year.
Possibly. We'll see.
Okay. That's cool. Now, you and I, before, when I was at Kobo, we had the opportunity to work together at Romantic Times in Atlanta. That was our first time out on the street together doing the PR
Yes.
thing for authors and readers. And I remember that for the several days that you were there, you didn't seem to have a single free moment. That you were engaged with readers and writers, and you were doing social media. You were all over the place in a very short time period. I'd love to talk about. I remember my experience from that, but I'm curious to get your perspective on that entire experience.
For sure. So Romantic Times was my first book themed conference that was more than, say, a few hours. So I was there for 4 days, and I went with the intent to interview 14 romance authors. And I did just that. But I was very much on the go because I wanted to capture everything, including the surroundings, the people who were there, as well, of course, the authors, because that's what I really wanted to know. Why are romance authors writing what they're writing? What do they struggle? What do they love? What do they want more from Kobo? So I video interviewed them all. And a lot of them required very little edits. And essentially, I was just asking them all similar questions. But my kind of fun infusion was to have a whiteboard, and I asked them all, what does romance mean to you? So they all wrote on the whiteboard different things. So romance meant to them, like they would write brave or strong or courageous. They'd write what they'd feel. But I also interviewed them on a personal level, understanding why are they writers? How did they get into this? And one of the most interesting things I continually heard was they didn't set out to really be a writer. One of the authors, who's now very successful, faced a severe medical treatment for years, and she spent a lot of the time in the hospital, and there's not much to do in the hospital. So she started writing, and that is how she is a very successful author today. She spent a lot of her time putting her time in hospitals to writing. So I spent a lot of time meeting them, interviewing them. I also talked to a lot of consumers, and I guess I was a little surprised by that fact. Of course, I knew they would be there. That's what keeps the industry booming. But I spoke to a lot of them about why they read what they read. And honestly, they were diehard fans. They had bedazzled t-shirts. They had bedazzled bookmarks. Like, I had never thought there was so much bedazzling in books until I went to this conference. And it really struck me by surprise that all of them were different. So I don't really like when people generalize anyone, but especially when it comes to readers. And I had the chance to meet, I'm going to say 100 plus different types of romance readers. And when I sat down and chatted with them, they were male, they were female, they were young, they were older, they were all types of demographics. They had all different professions. And I thought it was just interesting that so many people can congregate over one type of genre and take different things from it.
I think what I love what you said about that is you met 100 different types of romance readers at a single romance conference. That's kind of fascinating that it's such a diverse group of people when you would normally think of it as there's one type of romance reader.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Everyone was truly different. I mean, you may like similar books and you may have different favorites, but one of the things that really stuck with me is a mom who adopted a son. He was 13 when she adopted him. She didn't really know much about the male perspective of love and romance and intimacy. And she said that she made her son, or strongly encouraged him to read these romance books to get a female perspective of what is love, what is intimacy, and things that maybe women are looking for that are expressed in these romance novels that aren't necessarily told to 13-year-old boys in school or in video games or whatever they are doing.
That is really fascinating. The other thing that I think that appeals is, Kobo has a really hearty and healthy core reader base, and a good percentage of those people are romance readers. So that must have given you an opportunity to get the feel that you were interacting? I know there were people who read on all platforms and they read paper and stuff like that, but it probably gave you a good feel for those people that you're interacting with digitally regularly.
Absolutely. Yeah. The people that were there, they read physical books as well as ebooks. So I chatted with both because Kobo, of course, we sell ebooks and e-readers, but we understand physical books and ebooks live harmoniously together. And we just stress that there's certain times that maybe ebooks may be more convenient, such as traveling, or if you're reading on the commute, or you want to catch an audiobook on your way to the office. So we understand both things will forever probably exist and live harmoniously. And I thought that was interesting because they could tell that I was in media and by my badge, and they would ask who I'm here with, and I would get to talking about ebooks and e-readers and Kobo and why I love Kobo, trying not to be too biased, understanding I work here. But I'd hear a lot of different perspectives of e-readers and ebooks that I don't really think of on a day-to-day basis. I mean, my job, of course, is to promote ebooks and e-readers, but when you're hearing it from hundreds and hundreds of consumers about why they love Kobo or why they love ebooks, it really is, it's heartening to hear, and it makes you feel like you're there for the right reasons and you're helping more people enjoy stories on a day-to-day basis.
That's fantastic. So the other thing, and you've mentioned this and we mentioned it briefly earlier, is that late in 2017, Kobo launched audiobooks because, again, it's another convenient way for people to read. How's that been going?
Audiobooks have been going good. So, of course, I was part of the launch, leading up to it, and planning any events relating to it, and letting media know all information that I guess corresponds with audiobooks, understanding it is a new format for us. So, since Kobo's been in existence, we've released new e-readers, upgrades, having waterproof, having the Overdrive integration, always releasing new things. But audiobooks is the first kind of major innovation that we've had in some time. So originally it started with launching audiobooks, and there was a free month trial that I suggest everyone does. So you get your first audiobook free. And after the month trial, we learned quite a few things. Without touching on specific numbers, we learned that sometimes people read different things than they listen to, which at first it seems intuitive, but if you really think about it, for me, for example, I love reading really, really, really sad books. Like anything depressing, I love reading, and I think I like it so much because it puts me in a place where I realize, wow, you have a pretty good life. But then listening to that is not as exciting. So the things I listen to are like really funny memoirs or more business books, and I like to listen to business books on my way to the office. It kind of gets me in the zone. But what we've realized is that audiobooks cater to a younger demographic, and I think that spurs from podcasts. So now we have to really keep in mind that when we're marketing or when we're doing any social, we have to keep in mind that our ebook reader and our audiobook listener may be different demographics. They may want to see different things on social media. They may want different campaigns in marketing. So that's something that we've really taken hold of company-wide, and making sure that we are making enjoying a story, whether it's reading or listening, more compatible and easier for anyone that's there to listen.
That's fantastic. It makes me, because I listen to audiobooks and read print and digital, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious about that crossover. I've never even paid attention to my own preferences for audio versus digital reading versus paper. So I'm curious. I'm positive that you guys will probably be releasing some sort of study in the next year that compares and contrasts the type of people or the type of consumer that prefers to listen to this type of book or read that type of book.
I hope so.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I was so excited, so Kobo and Overdrive are both owned by Rakuten.
Yep.
And there has been an integration of the Rakuten's Overdrive library system in the Kobo Aura 1. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the Kobo Aura 1 is our most premium e-reader. It is waterproof, it has the largest screen that we currently sell, and it has the Overdrive integration, which essentially means it's a library at your fingertips. So you truly can borrow a book from a library with the touch of a finger. So setting up your account, you need a library card. It's the specific number that most libraries would provide you for free, and you would put that number into your Aura 1 device. That would give you access to the library books that are associated with that library card. And you can borrow a book, and the timing of borrowing, I believe it varies by library. And you can still use your e-reader for Kobo books, but you can also have the access of library. So if you're not sure if this is a book that you want to purchase, you can go ahead and borrow it as you would any other library.
Which I find absolutely fascinating, because it feels like Kobo and Overdrive are working together to just break the barriers towards allowing people to read more often, no matter where they are or how they can afford or not afford to read.
Absolutely. And that's our goal. We want to get as many stories in to be digested by people as we can. And if it's buying books, great. If it's using Kobo's free books, great. Or if it's Overdrive, we just want to give people an opportunity to read or listen to as many books as they can.
So the Kobo Aura One is the device where you can input your library card and then actually borrow books directly from your device, which is absolutely amazing. I've taken advantage of it for Hamilton Public Library several times. Are there plans to roll into some of the other devices or some of the other Kobo apps?
I can't comment on that.
Fair enough.
But
I got to ask the hard-hitting questions, don't I?
Yeah, we're always working on innovation. I know personally that I use Overdrive for renting out books, and working at Kobo, people think, well, you have books surrounded by you, but I also use the devices as a consumer would use it, because I can't promote something if I don't know how most people are using it.
And that's fair. And you also talked about the way you prefer to read certain items and then listen to other items. Now, do you have a preference for audio digital, checking out Overdrive versus the native Kobo app?
Not really. It's funny that you mentioned the Hamilton Library, because that's where I did do my university degree. So I actually still have my Hamilton Library card, and I tried it with my Aura One, and it does work. But now I'm situated in Toronto, so I'd be interested to see, which I haven't done yet, which books Toronto offers and which books Hamilton's offers, and is there a gap there? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, it might be related to the local consumers. I imagine there's going to be some crossover where they're recommending some of the top readers, or top read titles, or borrowed titles, I should say, rather than top sellers.
Mm-hmm.
That is fascinating to look at too. So what other exciting things that you talk about that are either new that we might not have spoken about, or are forthcoming at Kobo?
Kobo always tries to bring the most innovative e-readers to the market. I can't talk about anything specific in regards to e-readers or ebooks or audiobooks, but I can let all your listeners know that we are always working to improve all of our devices. And if you ever have suggestions, Kobo's always open to hearing about them. For our Aura One device, we brought in a selection of customers to really hear what did they want, and we tried our best to implement that. So we're always willing to hear suggestions about how we can make the lives of readers more convenient and easier.
Well, thank you for that. Let's remind listeners, how can they find out more about Kobo, about Kobo PR team, and stay up to date with what's going on and what exciting things you guys are doing next?
Absolutely. So I would suggest that you check us out on social. We are on almost all channels, but most actively Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we read all of our direct messages. We will comment on any questions that you have on our actual posts. So feel free to reach out through social.
Thanks so much. Those links will appear in the show notes for this episode. Sinead, thanks so much for taking the time during this holiday season to chat with me.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
I've always been fascinated with what digital reading brings to the equation. And no, I'm not talking about the fact that you can go on a long flight and carry 1,000 ebooks on a device like a Kobo or a Kindle, or even via the free app on your smartphone, rather than trying to pack a 300 or 600 page monster of a book into your carry-on luggage. And I'm not talking about the fact that an author can publish a book from a small town in a remote community in Northern Ontario, for example, and a reader on the other side of the globe, in Australia, for example, can purchase that ebook for about the price of a coffee. I'm talking about the analytics of reading. When someone reads a physical book, it's a completely intimate and private experience. But when someone reads a digital book, there's a digital footprint left that can echo back and provide insights into reading behavior far greater than anything we've ever had before. An oral storyteller certainly has the opportunity to gauge listener feedback. And having told ghost stories countless times to both adult and child audiences, I certainly use the live and visible feedback, not to mention some of the audio feedback. Yes, some people gasp at just the right moments as you're telling an eerie ghost story, or perhaps they suck in their breath at exactly the right moment where a plot twist occurs. But when a book is written on paper, it's often the world, and it's an intimate experience between the spirit of the writer and the reader. You don't get that feedback. When I was rolling out the initial version of what eventually became my novel I, Death back in 2006, I did it on a blog, and the story was told in real time from my main character's point of view. Now, based on comments from readers on this ongoing story, I was able to adapt and modify characters and situations, giving the audience more of what they were enjoying, and expanding on characters that had initially been created as quick walk-on and walk-off characters, because the audience really found those characters engaging. Of course, in regular writing and regular reading consumption, you can't have that. But with the advent of reading on Kobos and Kindles and iBooks and Nooks and all of the other ways that the reading data can be captured and analyzed, there's some amazing opportunities for understanding the readers better and then investing in more targeted marketing opportunities to the right people. Using my Wattpad account, for example, I have a pretty decent demographic view of the people who were reading the books that I've published there. I can also see the patterns of which chapters they like and rate, what gets the most reads, and where the engagement in a particular book falls off. Companies like Kobo and Kindle have the means to assist authors and publishers with amazing rating data, pinpointing drop-off points, chapters that people simply can't put down. And indie authors or even small publishers might be able to leverage this data, this info, to either revise and improve an existing title, for example, for a re-release of that book, or perhaps to apply those insights to future books. I am absolutely intrigued at the possibilities. Yes, it can be a frightful thing to consider in a very 1984-ish George Orwell way, but I'm more hopeful about that. When I worked at Kobo, when I was on the board of directors at BookNet Canada, I recall that there are certain pieces of data that you can't share openly and publicly unless there's enough data in place to anonymize or protect the readers or consumers. I.e., let's use an example. Let's say that as an author I sell a single copy of my book. And I know that my mom is the one who bought it for two reasons, because she said she bought the book. I saw the sale coming through Canada on Kobo, and because Kobo sends me a monthly spreadsheet that tells me interesting customer details such as the country, the city, and even the postal code or zip code of where that person is who purchased my books last month. But let's say I also had access to reading data, and I can see that I sold a single copy in December, and that not a single person ever opened my book. Then I call my mom on the phone, and I say, "Hey Mom, how'd you like my book?" And she says, "Oh, it was really good, I loved it." And then I raise the fact that I had access to my data that shows nobody read the book, and a fight ensues. So companies like Kobo, of course, have to be careful in how and when and where they release that data, because they don't want to be responsible for a rift created between mothers and sons after all. But I digress for a second. Yes, there can be frightening offsets, but when this data is managed and shared responsibly, and when writers and publishers are able to take and analyze that data and apply it to more strategic marketing, apply it to more strategic understanding of their target audience, this can be a very, very powerful tool in publishing, a tool that I am so looking forward to taking advantage of. Well, that's it for episode 3 of Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with a friend or review it on the podcatcher of your choice. Thanks for being here, and we'll catch you in episode 4 next week.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.